To breed or not to breed? That is the question. For many, the cost of raising kids is a major factor in their choice to remain childless. But having fewer children also has economic implications for society. Joining us with their perspectives in Tampa, Florida, Laura S. Scott, the author of Two is Enough. In Norfolk, Virginia, Shanice Jones, Childless by Choice. And in the nation's capital, Derek Miedema. He is a researcher at the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada. And we welcome all three of our guests to the agenda tonight. Glad to have you along for this discussion. And Laura, I want to start with you. Tell us why you decided to write this book, Two is Enough, A Couple's Guide to Living Childless by Choice.
Well, I was in my early 40s, actually, at the end of my reproductive life. I decided that my eggs were getting close to their expiration date, and I needed to be sure that this was the right decision for me and my husband at the time. So I looked at all the literature, and I realized that there wasn't a lot out there, and what had been written was really more for and about women, and no one had really examined current motives for childlessness, particularly with men. So it was important for me, I think, to do my own original research to see how and why people make this decision and what are the long-term implications of childlessness.
And we will start to unpack those reasons as we continue our conversation. Derek, they say that we need to be producing the proverbial 2.1 kids per family in order to keep the population stable. You've seen the numbers. How are we actually doing?
I believe we're around 1.69, so we're below that. But I want to say right off the bat that the fact that we're below is based on a whole number of factors, not only on those who choose not to have children. So it's not a situation where the root cause of that can be laid at any one particular group's feet. We all have responsibility for that.
Have you got kids?
Yeah, we have two. My wife and I have two.
Okay, but you're supposed to have 2.1. So what are you doing?
Well, we're still below. We're still below ourselves.
You got two, but are you done?
Well, we think so.
Okay.
So if we're done at two, then honestly, consider me part of the issue. And consider me part of the problem.
More on that in a second as well. Shanice, how much of your decision not to have children is based on money?
Oh, a big part, a total big part, coming from the generation that is not doing so well in the job market right now. The money part plays a big part. Matter of fact, I read something recently that said that it takes about, I think, $1 million now to raise a kid from age 0 to 18. So with me, my finances is not in order. So yes, it takes a lot. It takes a lot, and that was a big decision for me.
And Shanice, let me tell you, it doesn't stop at age 18 either. The $1 million may take you to 18, but it does continue after that.
You're right. You're right, Mom.
The fact, though, that money played such a large role in this, do you think that's wise? Mm-hmm. Are you worried that years down the road you're going to say, geez, I should have had those kids and figured out how to pay for it somewhere down the way?
At this point, no. Only because I feel like because things aren't, what's the word I'm looking for?
Things too precarious right now?
Myself personally. Well, yeah, that too. And then somebody mentioned something earlier about, Laura actually mentioned something earlier about being you adopt children, other people's kids, being like a parent figure. I feel like I'm that now because my cousins have kids, my friends have kids, and I'm that parent figure when they're not there. If their kids do something wrong, I still have to, if their parent isn't there, I have to step in and be like, hey, don't do that. So the whole money issue thing.
How old are you right now, if I can ask, Shanice?
Oh, 33.
33. So if you wanted to change your mind, you've still got a bit of time to do that.
Yeah, I'm totally open for the adoption thing more than anything.
Okay, gotcha. Derek, I wonder if you could help us with this. Make the argument from a financial point of view as to why you think we ought to be having more children in this society.
Well, really what happens when a population grows older, a number of things play out, and they all can result in different types of human suffering. One of the consequences of an aging population with not enough kids coming up after is that as the number of retirees grows, the number of people in the labor force can stagnate or shrink. That has consequences in terms of government policy, because how is the government going to afford to fund long-term care homes for all those seniors who can't afford them to pay their own way, so to speak, when they have a lower tax base? But it also has real consequences for the people coming up afterwards too, in terms of care themselves. I know that, you know, my wife is one of 4 and I'm one of 5, and we have 2 kids. So whatever role our kids play in caring for us, they're going to have to split that in 2 rather than being able to share it over 4 or 5. And that adds a level of complexity and a level of stress certainly to the ability to look after our parents as we might like to, as well as we might like to.
Laura, in getting you to respond to that argument, I'd like to read something that was in our national newspaper, the Globe and Mail, written by Elizabeth Renzetti, who's a columnist there. And she wrote that being childless is okay, just make sure you pay double tax so that my child does not have to pay for your old age security in addition to mine. You want to talk about whether you like that argument?
I don't think it's a good argument, and I think Derek makes a point that we don't have a fertility problem, we have a longevity problem. And we do have to figure out a way to care for our elderly folks. But when I was looking at some stats in Florida today, the wealthiest of all Floridians right now, about 56% of them, of the wealthiest Floridians, are aged 65 and older. We have one of the richest generations that we will probably ever see in our lifetime. So they sometimes are fully capable of caring for themselves financially, but we do need to figure out a way to help them physically through their later years. And I think end-of-life planning has to be a key part of it. And there is, I think, a certain significant amount of government responsibility for that.
I should just clarify that Elizabeth Renzetti wrote the original column. That was one of the comments that was made in response to the column that she wrote. And Derek, maybe you could come in after that and talk to us about why the double tax argument. What do you like about that?
I don't like that argument either, because the way Canada's set up, at least, is we pay each other's way. I don't only pay my own way, and I don't pay 100% of my costs for my lifetime in terms of the care that I need. So, it doesn't wash on either end. It doesn't wash on either end. But I think the issue of care that Laura mentioned, the issue of care is a really pressing one, because I did a survey of Ottawa long-term care homes where I asked the question specifically, what do you expect to change when baby boomers enter your care? Some of the things were as simple as Ontario Ministry of Health requires 2 baths or showers a week. And I know that when I go into a retirement home and I'm used to a shower a day, that's going to be a tough nut to crack. And long-term care homes right now don't have the staff to expand the number of showers that a person can have in a week. But it's also the reality that as we see more complex diagnoses, more people with Alzheimer's and dementia, for example, that those complex diagnoses in themselves require more care. And if we have fewer doctors and nurses coming forward if we have fewer doctors and nurses graduating from nursing and med school, then we're going to have a crisis of care as well.
Well, Shanice, let me try one more hit at this, and that's this. Do you think that you should have to pay more taxes because you have so far not given birth to a future taxpayer who's going to be paying taxes to support all these older people?
No, I don't think so. And I feel like the problem with that is that, for one, I feel like it's a job market thing. Because here in America, people don't have, they claim that jobs are few and far between now. So forget about paying taxes. We got to get these people doing what they love to do so they can make money to pay taxes. I don't think it's fair that I have to pay taxes because I don't have kids. If I don't even have a job, how am I supposed to pay taxes?
Okay, and Derek, the flip side of this is, if you're childless by choice, that means you don't have any kids who are in the education system, but other people you're going to be paying taxes anyway to help support other people's kids in the education system. So doesn't that sort of balance things out?
No, it's a question of whether it balances out. If you're looking at dollars and cents, I don't have those numbers. I don't have those numbers in front of me. But again, I think that that kind of argument is trying to foist something on those who choose to not have kids, or it's being, trying to foist something onto those who choose to do. Neither of that side of the argument is constructive, I think. And certainly as we move forward into an aging society and into dealing with the consequences of an aging society and the benefits, certainly, but we need to be able to stand together and work together in order to get through it.
Laura, can I get your view on this issue of whether or not people who don't have kids should be satisfied in the knowledge that they shouldn't have to pay double tax? They're already paying taxes to help put other people's kids through the education system.
Absolutely. I hear this on my Facebook page, for the Two is Enough Facebook page, all the time, about people feeling it's unfair that they have to pay taxes for things that they will never utilize. I certainly pay a higher price for my health care because I'm a woman, and they're assuming OBGYN care associated with having children, which of course I will never use and never have. So there is yet to be a healthcare group of childless folks that, certainly OBGYN care associated with having children is quite high, particularly in the US. So there's lots of other taxes that childless people pay that we will never see the benefit of those tax dollars in our lifetime. So it balances out, but I think it's kind of pundits and politicians who make the point that childlessness hurts the economy clearly don't really understand that childless folks do volunteer a lot. They contribute their tax dollars as far as sales taxes, Social Security, everything we contribute. We are more than parents contributing in the way of employment taxes, and most women who are childless work, and we pay taxes, and so there's a lot of benefits that the childless bring to a society. They are also responsible to a great degree for elder care. You will see in a lot of families that it's the childless siblings that are taking the bulk of the burden for elder care. So to demonize the childless population, I think, is the wrong way to go. I don't see any logic for it. It doesn't make any sense. What we really need to do if we want to create a solution for this is for the children we have, is to educate them. The reason why most women are postponing childbearing is because they want to have an education. They know the real results of an education and career. And so when women consider having children, the cost of having children for women is huge these days. They're giving up education. They're giving up career promotions. They're giving up their freedom, their hard-won freedom and independence to have children. So the cost of having children for women has increased greatly compared to 100 years ago, when a woman of independent means meant, a school marm or a prostitute. That was what it was called. Now a woman of independent means is actually a woman who's the breadwinner for her family, because increasingly women are the breadwinners of their family. And this is happening globally. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in the USA.
Sure, but let me put the flip side of this to Shanice, and I wonder, Shanice, if you've ever heard this, which is the allegation that because you're not having children, you're actually being a bit selfish in your life. Do you hear that?
Oh, yes. Hear it all the time. I'm being selfish. I don't, and things of that nature. I look at it like this. Well, are they counting the people who have kids unresponsibly? I have a relative now that has 11 kids, and the baby daddies are nowhere to be found. Nobody's taking care of these kids. So I don't feel like I'm being selfish. If you call me selfish and I feel like the woman that's walking around with 12 kids and no baby daddy, isn't that being selfish too? So yes, I get that a lot. And I also want to ask Derek a question. Did y'all put into account the women that are having all of these kids, and also the kids that are in foster care? Did y'all count these kids too?
Okay, Derek,
Yes,
come on back on that.
Well, certainly. The numbers that I'm quoting, the total fertility rate of 1.69, takes all babies born into consideration, those in foster care, all babies alike. So we are taking that into consideration. And I do know that we have as many as 30,000 kids in Canada in foster care. That's certainly, those kids need homes as well.
Laura, let me try this with you, following up on the angle of selfishness, because Jonathan V. Last wrote a book called What to Expect When No One's Expecting, America's Coming Demographic Disaster. And here's the quote: "Having children is difficult, but important work. And the main threat to fertility comes from a worldview that places the self at the center." Now, you've obviously interviewed for your book hundreds of childless men and women for your research. And this issue of you're not having kids because you're selfish, I gather, comes up all the time. What's the reaction?
We hear it all the time, it's kind of puzzling because who are we hurting by not having children, other than maybe fathers and mothers who want to be grandparents? So the selfish thing, the selfish label really doesn't stick. It's hurtful, but it doesn't make any sense to us because when you examine the motives for not having children, sometimes they're very altruistic. And when you talk to parents about their motives for having children, sometimes they're less than altruistic. They're kind of like, well, I want someone to love me, to be there when I'm older, to take care of me. These are less than altruistic motives. So when
you're
you go back
suggesting
down
in some
to the
respects
motives,
that there's a selfish motive for people having children, not just not having children.
I don't know why you would have children unless you really wanted them. There are obviously people that have children that didn't plan for them. But for intentional parents, generally they're having children because they really want that experience of being a parent. They see the benefits of that. So they're not having children to be taxpayers for the state. They're having children because that's what they want to experience.
Let's go to the immigration argument, Derek. True, you pointed out right off the top of the program, we're not having 2.1 kids per family, it's 1.6 something. Can't we just resolve the problem of a low birth rate, though, by just cranking up the immigration a bit? We already take in, I think, per capita as much as any country in the world, if not more.
Well, there's two issues with an aging population. One is that our population is aging, of course. The other is the issue of how many people are in Canada, for example. What immigration can do is keep the population level steady, but if you look at the age structure of immigrants that we're bringing into Canada, that age structure isn't young enough to slow down the aging process. So from the perspective of the aging of Canadian population, immigration cannot be an answer. But I would also add that if fertility trends continue, not only in Canada but around the world, we're going to be in a situation where more countries are experiencing the same demographic decline that we are. More countries are looking for immigrants, and there will be less immigrants to draw from. So I'm not sure that if current fertility rates continue, that we'll even be able to sustain our current level of immigration.
All right, let me ask Shanice about incentivizing, strange word, but incentivizing women to have children. There are governments, including governments here in Canada, which pay a baby bonus or give you a tax break or something like that in order to encourage you to have children. Do you think that would work in your case? If the government paid you, let's say, $20,000 to have a kid, would you have one?
No, $20,000 just it? What happened to, okay, well, y'all gonna help me take care of the baby all the way until death? $20,000 sounds good, but $20,000 is not enough to help with creating taxpayers, because that's what it seems like the whole thing is. Y'all want to create more taxpayers. No.
Okay, Laura, do you think these kind of incentives work?
It's proven in other countries like Australia that they don't work. Tax incentives don't work for the childless by choice. I've had this conversation many times with the couples who have chosen to remain childless. What would it take? How much money? There is no dollar amount. You just can't incentivize this. You look at a carrot or a stick approach. What carrot? I mean, it has to be a pretty juicy, fat carrot. We're talking way more than, as we said, raising a child to college age is a huge expense. What was happening in Australia is they were offering incentives to have children, but the only people that were taking advantage of that were people that were planning for that child anyway. So they actually didn't see a huge increase. And really, what kind of stick approach can you take? How can, what kind of stick can you use to create breeders for the state that wouldn't infringe on human rights and free will?
Well, Derek,
it just doesn't work. I don't see it working.
I think you know, Derek, that Quebec is the most Catholic province in Canada, and it is also similarly, I think, the province with the lowest birth rate. And they've tried incentivizing women for years to have more kids, and it doesn't seem to be working. Do you think this can be made to work?
No, in fact, at the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada, we consider that the government should in fact be neutral when it comes to people having kids. This is a personal choice that couples make, and they have their own range of reasons in choosing not to have kids or to have kids and how many. Government should be neutral, and in fact, what we see in Quebec, I think it's reasonable to say that when we see huge investments in incentives to have kids, even if they do bump up the birth rate a couple of points, say if it's 1.69, it goes to 1.71 or 75, it'll never get back to replacement rate, and they're just not sustainable. They're not sustainable now, and if the trends that I've laid out continue in terms of a labor force, smaller labor force, and a growing number of retirees plays out, then they simply won't have the cash to continue those either. They don't show themselves to work, and neither are they financially sustainable.
Let me do a follow with you, Derek, because if I understand the modus vivendi of your organization, you would like Canadians to have more kids. And yet you are neutral on the government's position on that, and yet you've also told us you think it's in society's interest that we have more children. I wonder, is there a contradiction in any of that?
No, because government neutrality government neutrality for us means, the question becomes basically, we know that there are people out there who don't have kids and want them, and we know that there are people out there who have kids and want more but don't have them. And so why? Why is that? We need to find why that is, and insofar as the government can get out of the way in terms of giving people more freedom to make those choices, that's what we would call for.
Okay, let's relax everybody for a second here, because we're going to play a clip from this documentary called The Childless by Choice Project. Laura, you know all about this, so let's play this clip right now, and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please.
For me, I think it was just when I looked at other couples and my circle of friends, my family members. I mean, we were the first to get married in our family, but everybody kept saying, why aren't you having kids? Why aren't you having kids? And I started thinking, God, this cultural pressure. And I think it kind of drove me crazy too. I just got sick of it. And then I don't know if I was being a rebel or what it was. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to have them. I'm going to do what I want to do. I think the cultural pressure really turned me off.
Let's talk about that cultural pressure for a while. Shanice, do you think that you have faced in your life greater pressure to have children because you're a member of the Black community?
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. Especially to get married and have kids, it's a total big thing. Everybody wants to, well, in the Black community, I know we want that unit because there are a lot of single parents in our community. We really want that mother, father, and the kids there, and having that as a main focus is a lot of pressure. And then when you go out here and go to date and try to find that other half to get married, to have them kids, it's slim pickings, it's craziness, the whole dating thing is out of whack, and a lot of that comes into play. So yes, there's a lot of pressure coming in from family members, friends, oh, when you're gonna have kids, or you should be settled down by now. People don't realize that, okay, well, I still have to find somebody to get with and make sure that we are compatible before we even start having kids. So yes, the pressure is there in our community, not to mention when we do all of a sudden do have kids, it seems like part of us run away, like the father goes away or the mother goes away. We have a problem with our society with the Black community as keeping the family together. So yes, the pressure is there.
Let's do a little comparing and contrasting here. Do you think the idea in the African American community of not having children is more objectionable than in the white community?
I believe so.
So it is a bigger problem for you.
I believe so. I've come across few of the Black community, my people, saying, oh yeah, I don't want to have kids. You either hear them say, oh, I'm gonna wait until I get down the line, or usually we've already had them in our teens or in our 20s, and we either say, well, we're done and get our tubes tied, or we continue. So yeah.
Laura, let's get really politically incorrect here. You've studied this. What ethnic communities particularly put pressure on kids to have kids?
I think there's a lot of communities. I wouldn't just say that there's one or two. There's a lot of religious communities. Even in the South, and rural South in the Bible Belt, we're talking about white families who put a lot of pressure on young women and men to settle down and have kids right away without asking them if that's what they want. So yeah, there's an assumption of parenthood that still remains in many, many communities, whether they be religiously based communities or culturally communities. It happens all over the world, and we, in the clip that you just showed of the documentary, the Childless by Choice Project documentary, when I was filming that, I talked to a lot of people. We talk about Orthodox Jewish communities. I mean, it's a very strong bias towards having kids in large families. And so that's happening all over the world. People are feeling that pressure. I know even in the white community, there's a sort of thing like, I want a baby buddy, so, if your girlfriend's having a child, she might come up and say to you, oh, you gotta have a kid, we can be baby buddies, and da-da-da. So yeah, that happens across the board. The pressure to have children, we are still making the assumption that everybody will have a child, whether they plan for it or not. But increasingly, that's not the case. Here in the States, we're up to about 20% of women that will never have a child in her life by choice or by circumstance, and it's higher in other countries. So we have to get over the assumption that everyone's going to have a child and we'll all be better off for it, because clearly that's not going to be the case. Infertility is on the increase due to environmental factors, STDs, that kind of thing. We need to get used to the fact that as many as 25% of women around the world will never have children, and start thinking about that in economic terms, so that our economies can prepare for that. In my most cynical, I kind of imagine, a bunch of politicians in a room saying, well, we've got to distract from this problem and blame childless women and figure out how we can, delay this until the next, election cycle, because nobody's really thinking about what's going to happen demographically, economically in the next 50 years. No one seems to really be taking responsibility. All I see our leaders doing is just wringing hands and blaming people.
Okay, let me jump in here if I can.
They really need to be planning for.
Forgive me, we're down to the last few minutes and I want to touch on a couple of more things. Derek, this cultural pressure we've been talking about, would you advise that?
I think we need to reach a point where we're respectful of each other's choices. Again, this is a profoundly personal choice that people make, and ultimately those who choose to have kids need to respect those who choose not to, and vice versa.
Okay, in which case, here's the follow-up. If it's, as Laura says, that 20 to 25% of the women in this world are not going to have any kids at all, for all of the reasons we've been describing, does it therefore then become more incumbent upon those who do want to have children to have more children?
Again, does it become incumbent on? I don't think it's the role of government or of anyone else to tell people what they need to do, what choices they need to make. But I do think we need to be aware of the long-term consequences that could happen if fertility trends, in concert with a longer lifespan, in concert with lower infant mortality, if all these trends continue, then we are not going to be able to sustain our way of life. Statistics Canada projects that between 1981 and 2031, the ratio of workers to retiree could go from 6 to 1 to 3 to 1. And that, just looking at that on the surface, means that the average taxpayer, the portion of their taxes that goes to pay for retirement benefits, for example, each taxpayer would need to pay double. And if we think today, if your viewers and listeners think about what it'd be like to see your tax bill double today, how would that affect your ability to pay your bills?
Understood. I want to thank everybody for participating in this discussion tonight. Laura S. Scott, the author of Two is Enough, on the line from Tampa, Florida. Shanice Jones, Childless by Choice, from Norfolk, Virginia. And Derek Miedema, the Institute of Marriage and the Family Canada, in our Ottawa studios. Thanks so much, everybody.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.